Hello, Algebra 1B students. I'm looking at it's called writing equations in point slope form. That's how it's listed in your Google Classroom. It's due on the 14th. It's due Monday. Today is the 11th. And the point slope form that you will be looking at this formula, y equals y1 or y minus y1 equals m times the quantity of x minus x1. Now, the way I do it is I take this and I get the y by itself each time just to start, and it just makes life a little bit easier. So let me write this a little bit neater. I have y equals m quantity x minus x1 and quantity plus y1, okay? So I just took this y1 and I just added it to the other side. Just makes things easier. You'll see why. All right, here we go. You can slow this down as much as you need to. I'm going to go through it kind of quickly. The slope I put in for m, and here's my x1. Here's my y1 each time, right? Y sub 1, x sub 1. Okay, so I just plug in minus my x1 and plus my y1, and that's a negative 3, so I have to minus 3. And then I just use the distributive property. Negative 1 times x is negative x. Negative 1 times a negative 4 is a positive 4. And then I just combine my like terms. I do 4 minus 3 is 1 and bring everything else down. And this is my equation. Here's my x1, y1, and I just plug in my m, my slope, my x1, and my y1. Remember, subtracting a negative becomes positive, and this is my plus my y1, so just leave that the same. Use the distributive property, and I end up getting this. 5. Here is my x1, my y1. Here's my slope. I put in my slope. I put in my x1. I put in my y1. I use the distributive property. Negative 3 times a negative 6 is a positive 18. That's why it becomes positive. Combine my like terms. I'm all good. 7. I plug in my slope, my x1 minus 7, and my y1 plus 0. I just use the distributive property and I get my final answer. Number 9, I put in my slope, I put in my x1, and I put in my y1. Plus a negative is just minus, so minus 1. 1/5 of x is 1/5 x. 1/5 of negative 5 is a negative 1. If you weren't sure, you could just do 1/5 times negative 5 on your calculator, and you will get negative 1. Combine my like terms, I get negative 2. Y equals 1/5 x, negative 2, minus 2. Okay, for the other page, you are going to have to use this formula first to find the slope. Then once you find your m, your slope goes right here, and then you have your x1 and your y1, okay? So here we go. I label it all the time, x1, y1, x2, y2. I use that slope formula, y2 minus y1, x2 minus x1, and I get 2 over negative 1, which is 2 divided by negative 1 is negative 2. So that's my slope. And then I just plug in my x value, x1 value, and my y1 value right here. Use the distributive property, and I end up with my answer right off the bat. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times 0 is 0, and then I just have this plus 8. 13, I have my x1, y1, x2, y2. So I have my 8 minus the 5 and negative 3 minus the 4. I get 3/7. This one gets a little ugly. I use the distributive property. Here's my x1, here's my y1. minus my x1 plus my y1 from that formula I showed you earlier. And I just use the distributive property, and it ends up looking like this. You might have 42, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50. I'm sorry, 42 plus 5 is 47. You might have 47 sevenths. That's fine. Okay, 15, label them. Use the slope formula. You'll get -1. Plug in your slope. Plug in your x1 and your y1. And go ahead and work it out. 17, label them. Use your slope formula. Slope should be 2/3. Plug in your x1. Plug in your y1. Work it out. This one's pretty ugly too. A lot of fractions. You should end up with y equals 2x, 2/3 x plus 3 and 2/3. You could have this 9, you could have this 11 over 3 if you wish. And then the last one, number 19, I label them and I figure out my slope. And then I plug in my slope, put in my x1 and my y1. By the way, if you chose these two and plugged in these two numbers instead, you would get the same answer, which is pretty cool because they're points that are on the same line. So if you need any further help, make sure to zoom in on me.